What's up, guys? 3-3 yesterday, which wound up being a very small win with the way the money lines worked out in those. Started out looking like a really bad day in baseball and probably was worse than it should have been with the White Sox. That would have won if it was a first five inning wager, which maybe I should have done that. I mean, I do obviously weigh the starting pitching matchups pretty heavily, which you have to because that's more than half of the game. But I thought the bullpens were not in a bad enough situation to not make it a full game play. And I think it was a sweep avoiding spot for the White Sox, right? So I liked that as a full game scheduling spot as well. Crochet did well enough. He outpitched Marsh, and it was 3-2 White Sox through five, and I think into like the seventh or eighth inning, and the White Sox bullpen blew it. So that sucks. The Miami Marlins somehow got there with an easy win. And then what was the other? Oh, the under in the first 5 innings, Cubs, Dodgers. That completely unraveled. The Dodgers only gave up one earned run. Stone didn't pitch that poorly. He only gave up one earned run during that stretch. But it was, I think, 4 unearned runs or maybe 5 unearned runs, something like that, that the Cubs scored. And it was 5 or 6-0 in the 4th or 5th inning. And the game wound up going into a rain delay. And I was just like, just cancel the game before it even becomes official, before it even becomes a 5-inning game. Cancel it. Push the bet. I don't even know if that would result in a push or not. If the game just gets completely erased, I would think maybe it would, even though you'd already lost the bet, but that didn't happen. They finished the game. But that was all a result of a bunch of unearned runs scoring. The Dodgers, I think, had 3 errors in the first couple of innings, or first few innings, I guess, which completely destroyed that bet. And then 2 wins in the NBA, really easy. And the win on the Miami Marlins, just hilarious. 0-9 Miami Marlins are the only winner in baseball yesterday for me. The NBA saved me a little bit with 2 really easy wins on the Magic and the Minnesota T-Wolves. The T-Wolves actually went off a 2.5-point favor, and I had them as a 2.5-point underdog because it was announced late that LeBron was going to be scratched, which that does sometimes happen when it's a team that doesn't maybe have as much to play for, with the Lakers having clinched a playoff spot and being on a back-to-back, the back end of a back-to-back. They decided to rest the very ancient and old LeBron James, who I am almost as old as LeBron, so I am also ancient. Moving on to today, of course, college basketball. The NBA, I believe, is off today because it's the college basketball championship night, which we know is Purdue and UConn. I would say that I'm not going to play anything in this game, but if you were to look at the side in this game, it's really tough, I think, because you're not getting any value playing UConn, a team that's just been one of the most dominant tournament teams over a 2-year stretch in history, basically, even though their personnel has changed a little bit from last year, too. Excuse me. They're up from a 5-point favorite, which I believe was the look ahead. When this line came out after the game's finished Saturday night, I think this line was 6.5, and now it's up to 7. And it's 7 with juice, with UConn, of course, being the favorite. I mean, you're not getting any bargains by laying the points with UConn in this one, I'll tell you that. So even if you think, well, UConn is totally dominant and they've been covering everything, so I don't want to step in front of UConn, well, yeah, that's true, neither do I. But you're not getting any value if you're laying the 7. So I would look probably at finding some other ways to play the game. 67% of the tickets on UConn and 66% of the cash. So they're the public team, which seems kind of obvious that they would be. It does seem like the cash discrepancy might be a little bit against them, though. So maybe there is some bigger money coming in and taking the points on Purdue, especially with the line getting up this high. I mean, if anybody in the tournament field is going to challenge UConn, I mean, it very well could be Purdue. As KenPom now has these 2 teams, the 1 and 2 ranked teams, and he only has this being a 3-point game, with these being the number 1 and number 3 teams in offensive efficiency, respectively. Of course, UConn being 1, UConn being 4th in defensive efficiency, and Purdue 12th. So KenPom does have this, based on the metrics, he has this being a much closer game. Purdue, a very well-rounded team. And, of course, they might have that little bit of extra motivation there because UConn already I mean, UConn, I guess, has the experience edge because they've been here and done that. So that's a little bit of an edge to UConn. Same coach as last year, numerous of the same players that they had last year on that championship team. So they've been here before. But Purdue might have that little bit of an extra chip on their shoulder, is what I was about to say, because of what happened to them last year, losing to a 16 seed. And of course, remember, the only other team that lost to a 16 seed was Virginia. They won the championship next year, although they were a team that really was not that good offensively. They were very good defensively, very good at slowing down the game, and efficient enough on offense that they were able to get through that tournament and win. But they won a lot of close games in that tournament. Virginia did. We'll see what can happen with Purdue here. Purdue did also play the earlier game on Saturday, so I don't know if that might be a slight rest advantage to them because they got to play the earlier game. And I guess that game was kind of over sooner in the game than the UConn one was. UConn had to play later into the night and deeper into the game before they were able to pull away a bit. And Alabama kind of forced them into a little bit more of an up-tempo game, whereas Purdue's game was, even though you could argue it was a physical defensive game, it was a slower-paced game with a lot less running. So the rest edge could actually be a little bit in Purdue's favor. So I'm starting to talk myself into a lean on Purdue plus the points, actually, but there's no way I'm going to play it. Absolutely no way. And I would also lean to the under, but that line has moved down a bit as well. I think that line came out certainly too high at 147.5, but now it's down to 145.5, juice to the under, with 58% of the tickets on the over, 67% of the cash on the under. So kind of a pros versus Joes look to the market there on the total. With the public, of course, recreational bettors are going to come in and play this over, just thinking that, these are two good offensive teams. They're going to score a lot, but these are also very slow teams. UConn is one of the bottom 50 in tempo, and Purdue is one of the bottom 100 in tempo. So these are both slow teams. And when it's a championship game, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get basically the most intense defense that these teams are going to play because it's the championship. It's the last game they're going to be playing. So that tends to be more conducive to unders, and I think this line did come out a bit too high, especially based on how high scoring UConn's game was in the previous game. Or UConn's been putting up a lot of point totals in the 80s and stuff, so that also kind of has something to do with it. But Purdue is probably the best defense that they're going to run into, and well, they must be, right? Yeah, because UConn avoided Iowa State, so this is going to be the best defense by far, actually, that UConn's run into. So that's another thing about potentially leaning to Purdue. And I guess Purdue almost seems like they're correlated with the under as well to some extent, because if the game is going to be lower scoring, that means all the points are worth more. So taking the underdog kind of makes sense in that situation as well, even though Purdue actually is the team that plays slightly faster than UConn does. But if you think about UConn's path to get here, they've faced a couple of really poor defenses in the last couple of games in Alabama and Illinois. Those are teams that are very, very good offensively, but really bad defensively. So now they're running into Purdue is actually going to be the best defense that UConn has faced in this tournament. I think the best defense that they've faced besides Purdue, the best defense that they've faced up until this game, I think, was probably San Diego State. So San Diego State's a pretty good defensive team, but Purdue, very balanced, very good. They're definitely good defensively as well as offensively. So this is probably going to be UConn's toughest game. I think without a doubt it is their toughest opponent. So it is possible that Purdue can hang in this game and be the only team that UConn runs into that can do that. We do have an NHL card. I'm not playing either of these games, but these are games with playoff implications, with Pittsburgh at Toronto. My lean would be to Pittsburgh in that one, just because Pittsburgh, they've reeled off, I think, 4 wins in a row, and they're only 1 point, I believe, out of the wild card now. So Pittsburgh actually fighting to get into the playoffs now, where it looked like that wasn't even going to be a possibility. But it does look like Toronto has the cash discrepancy. The line's moved up on them a little bit from minus 144 to minus 149 on the money line as a home favorite. 81% of the tickets, 94% of the cash, it looks like, according to pregame's odds screen here. I don't know about that, but Toronto probably is going to be public, but I think Pittsburgh getting an underdog price like this and being the team that should be more motivated because they're fighting to get into the playoffs, whereas Toronto has already clinched a playoff spot, I'm pretty sure, and they're sitting in the second spot, I believe, or maybe the third in. Yeah, they might be in the third in the Atlantic, but they're like in no danger of completely dropping out of the playoffs or anything like that. So Pittsburgh, I think, has a bit more to play for there. And then in the Western Conference game, it's tonight Vegas at Vancouver. Vancouver's up from -120 to -121. 65% of the tickets on them, but 53% of the cash over on the other side on Vegas. Public probably coming in on Vancouver, knowing that Vancouver's had a better season than Vegas. Vancouver, the slightly better team, but the odds are telling you they're not that much the better team. Also factoring in the motivational aspect of this, even though Vegas did just, I believe, beat Vancouver at home on Vancouver's road trip that Vancouver just had. I think Vancouver is returning from a road trip here, although it was only a 3-game road trip where they stayed out west, so not like the worst return home spot, but it is still a return home spot for them. And Vegas, I think, just has more to play for right now because they're in one of the wild card spots right now. I think they're fighting to stay in the playoffs, whereas Vancouver, I believe, has already clinched a playoff spot and has one of the higher seeds right now. If the playoffs are to start right now, they're probably not going to drop that much further, although they could. But I think they only have like a 3 or 4 point lead over whoever's right behind them. But Vegas, just like Pittsburgh and Vegas are both in spots where they're fighting to even get into the playoffs up against teams that have already clinched playoff spots. So those are the ways that I would look in those two games. To the teams that have more motivation, they're not playing those. I'm going to go to a Major League Baseball where we actually have a more full card than I'm used to seeing on a Monday in baseball. It looks like most teams are playing, which is unusual for Monday. There are some teams that are off, but usually I think there are more teams that are off. Usually I look to first go against teams that played in the ESPN night game, primetime game, which was Houston and Texas. Oh, but they're both playing today, and they're continuing that series into a Monday night. So I'm not going to get involved in the Houston, Texas game. I like it when the team that was in that night game had a big like ESPN primetime game and either won dramatically or lost dramatically or something like that. And now they're stepping away from that and maybe traveling or something. Like that tends to be a spot where you get to find value in going against the team, but we don't have that here. I am going to have 2 plays, though, that I have right now. One is going to be in the, I guess, earlier, slightly evening slot there with 6:40 p.m. Eastern, Detroit at Pittsburgh. And I think all the games that I played yesterday were in the central time zone, which is why they were all at 2 and not 1. But whatever the case may be, this one is Detroit at Pittsburgh. And I'm going to be on the Detroit Tigers here, which I think you might be getting some value playing the Tigers in this one. Got another one of these interleague games. You get more interleague games now in baseball, I think, than you used to with the way the scheduling is now. Pittsburgh is going to be the public team with the way that they've started the season on fire. They're sitting in a -120 favorite. So the odds makers are telling you that Pittsburgh is basically just getting home field and like nothing else essentially here. So odds makers are kind of telling you these two teams are even, which kind of means they're telling you that Pittsburgh isn't as good as we might think based on seeing their record. They're on an 8-2 start to the season, I think, but come on, man. I think they played 4 games against Miami, or maybe it was 3. They had a sweep against Miami thrown in there. So Pittsburgh's good record, I think, is a little bit misleading because they've played some inferior opponents. And in this game, they have 85% of the tickets, but it looks like 86% of the cash right now, although the line has not moved, even though the public looks like they're coming in on the Pittsburgh side. I don't know how much volume there is on this game, really. Usually baseball doesn't have that much volume, but maybe a little bit more when baseball is kind of the only thing that's on today besides college basketball, with no NBA and a very small hockey card today. So the fact that the line hasn't moved at all with that amount of the public being on Pittsburgh kind of tells you the books are kind of just okay with taking in that money there. And I'm going to look to go the other way, as I said, and take Detroit on the money line as an underdog. I don't even know what you can get as a line right now. Plus 106, it looks like, as the underdog price here. I like the matchup here. I think the records are a little bit misleading, as the odds are kind of telling you, with Pittsburgh hot to start the season at 8-2. They're coming off a good series against Baltimore, man. And yeah, they're not traveling, but Detroit's travel spot I don't think is very very much going from home out to Pittsburgh. Not a huge travel spot. And I actually think it's an advantage for Detroit a little bit, which I'll get into in a minute. Pittsburgh, we just saw won a series against Baltimore, and everybody knows that Baltimore is supposed to be one of the best teams in the American League, and they probably still are, but that's a big series for Pittsburgh. It makes Pittsburgh look pretty good, man. So I don't think you're going to get any value on an 8-2 team that just beat Baltimore in a series coming out of that, and they only have one other loss on the season so far besides the one loss that they had in that series to Baltimore. And they're up against a Detroit team that just lost a series to the Oakland A's at home. And they lost the last 2 games by a combined 11-1 score. Nobody's going to want to take Detroit here, man, after that. That is just miserable. I don't know how you could perform that poorly against the A's and score 1 run across 2 games after Detroit started the series okay in probably the worst spot that they were in, which was a return home spot, which was their home opener, but it was a return home spot from a 2-series road trip, although it only took them to Chicago and New York, but still a return home spot. They were able to win and not cover the run line in that one. And then they lost the other 2 games. That's just embarrassing, man. So I think the fact that they're now leaving home to go out on the road, I think that's a positive, because when you're playing poorly at home, one of the best things that can happen for that team is to go out on the road. Just you kind of leave all that behind at home. You don't have to listen to what the press is saying about you. You get to just go out on the road. It kind of alleviates a bunch of those distractions. You get to just focus on baseball. So I think that is going to be a positive for Detroit to kind of help them bounce back from these really bad performances against the A's. In the game yesterday against the A's, Detroit didn't really wreck their bullpen or anything. After Flaherty got knocked out after 6 innings, he didn't really pitch that poorly. His strikeout walk ratio was quite good. He just got hit and gave up 6 earned runs, which is, he pitched better than what the runs allowed would really tell you there, based on the other stats that he put up. But they only used 2 pitchers in relief, so I don't think Detroit's bullpen is really in bad shape coming into this. They used Faedo to kind of eat up a couple innings there. So they were able to save most of their good relievers, I would say, coming into this game. So the bullpen situation, I don't think is bad for them. Pittsburgh is coming off having to hold off the Orioles in a very close win against the Orioles. Pittsburgh didn't really use that much of their bullpen either. Or actually, Pittsburgh won in a walk-off. So actually, that almost makes you like this a little bit better. So Pittsburgh only used 2 relievers as well. So their bullpen isn't in terrible shape either. But I think the bullpens could kind of be considered to just be a wash based on both teams having used 2 relievers yesterday. But Pittsburgh actually won on a walk-off. And it was actually, I believe, the second walk-off win that they had in a row. So maybe their wins over the Orioles maybe are a little bit misleading, because those games were games where they were losing in the 9th inning in both of those, and won in dramatic fashion in both games. So I think that could even put Pittsburgh in a letdown spot here after doing that, twice in a row against one of the better teams in the American League. And now they get a sub 500 Detroit team coming in. So this situation doesn't look good to me for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has Mitch Keller pitching. If his stats don't look good this year, in 2 starts, he hasn't been very good. Giving up 15 hits and 4 walks in 11 innings. That's not good. And 8 earned runs, also not good. So he's putting way too many men on base, only 8 strikeouts. That's almost kind of in line with what his career stats are. His career ERA, 4.75 and a whip of 1.46. Not very good. He's 28 now. He's got multiple seasons several seasons basically under his belt now. The last 3 seasons really being his full season since 2021 onward. And his stats really are not that good. Even in the best full season that he had, which was in 2022 with a 3.91 ERA, his whip was not good and was indicative that his ERA should have been higher at 1.4. His whip was actually lower last year at 1.25, so he actually got a little bit better last year. Last year, he actually improved his strikeout capabilities over what he was doing prior to that, so that does scare me a little bit that he was able to able to tally good strikeout numbers last year, but the walks continue to be an issue, so he's kind of wild. He does have okay strikeout stuff, but I don't trust Keller. I don't think he's that good. And up against Detroit's hitters, he has been okay. They've seen him 28 at bats worth, and they are only 6 for 28, 214. So he has been pretty good against them, but I just don't like the situation. And I think the pitching situation for Detroit is actually better here. I prefer Reese Olson as the pitcher in this matchup. He's one of these young, really talented pitchers for Detroit. He only has one season under his belt so far. He put up good strikeout numbers, and his whip was 1.12 with a 3.99 ERA in his first season, his rookie season. He put up numbers like that. So that tells you he's got some pretty good stuff, man. I would have to think that is what that is indicative of. His strikeout walk ratio also better than Keller's. So his stats all look better than Keller's, and he's also the younger guy here by, well, only 4 years, but his statistics just are indicative that he is a better pitcher, and he's up against a Pittsburgh team that is more unfamiliar with him than basically than anybody, and more unfamiliar with him than Detroit's hitters are with Mitch Keller. So Olson, only 2 hitters on Pittsburgh have ever seen him before, Olivares and Taylor, and they're 0 for 5 off him lifetime with 3 strikeouts and no walks. So he has pitched well against the players that he's seen on the team, and the rest of the Pirates hitters haven't even seen him. So I think that's an advantage to Reese Olson as well here. So I'm going to be on Detroit for all those reasons. And then in the other game I'm going to be on is I'm actually going against what I'm seeing in the market in the other one, which is I'm going to fade the Los Angeles Dodgers. And we just got to decide, like, should we just actually make this a money line play, or is it going to make sense to make a spread play? Because you can find the or the run line, I should say. You can find the plus 1.5. I'm going to be on Minnesota here. You can find the plus 1.5 runs at minus 120 right now. So it might be worth looking that way, or maybe even waiting a little bit more, because I don't think the line looks like it's coming down. It looks like it's moving up on the Dodgers. Dodgers are up from minus 145 to minus 152, 79% of the tickets. So of course they're public. They are the Dodgers. And they have 85% of the cash, it looks like. So it looks like they do have the cash coming in on them, and it's moving the line up. But I disagree with the movement. I think you're getting a nice amount of value on Minnesota here as a home underdog for multiple reasons. But of course, the Dodgers, I mean, they're just going to be an overvalued commodity in general. Even though, yes, they did look bad yesterday, and they looked worse than they actually are, as I mentioned, when I lost that under in the first 5 innings in that game. A lot of that was unearned runs being given up by LA with very poor defense there. But that still, the Dodgers are coming off a big series against the Cubs, even though they went 1-2 in the series. Still, the Cubs, not really a bad team. I mean, they're a team that has their name carries a lot of weight, so that is kind of a big series up against the Cubs. They're coming off that, and now they're facing a Minnesota Twins team, which, yeah, I mean, Minnesota was in the playoffs last year, but are they really going to be focused that much on Minnesota? Dodgers are an above 500 team, of course, and considered to be a legit contender with all the moves that they made. They're a stacked team, and they're up against this Minnesota team who bettors don't really like them because they don't score a lot of runs, even though they were in the playoffs last year. And I think their pitching is pretty good, and they have certain starters like the one who's pitching today who I think are good and are good enough that you can bet on this Minnesota team in some of these spots. Minnesota, they went 0-2 against Cleveland in the series that they just played. But one part of the reason why I like this is because the last game, yesterday's game, actually got rained out between Minnesota and Cleveland. So Minnesota actually didn't wind up playing yesterday, whereas the Dodgers, of course, did play a game against the Cubs yesterday. So I think that gives you a little bit of a rest edge on Minnesota coming in here. Kind of one of those rare spots where pretty much every team plays on Sunday, and you're coming into Monday now, and you have a team that actually didn't play on Sunday in Minnesota up against a team who did, of course, the Dodgers. Minnesota had that rain out, so they're coming in maybe in a little bit of a better rest spot, and it means their bullpen is in a better rest spot because they didn't have to use any of their bullpen yesterday, whereas the Dodgers did, although they only used a couple of relievers. I think Stone kind of remained in the game. Then the Dodgers used one reliever, I think, to eat up some innings in that game. So they really didn't tax their bullpen that much, but still, I think it's a rest edge for Cleveland, or excuse me, I keep saying Cleveland, for Minnesota coming into this one. In Minnesota, I think that having that day off, I think might help them a little bit, even though they're staying at home. I think they're going to want to turn this around and bounce back after losing both games to Cleveland. Although Cleveland is in first place in the AL Central, I think it's kind of unclear how the AL Central is going to shake out this year. Although Cleveland may be one of the better teams in that division. That division was probably the worst in baseball last year. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think the Dodgers are coming off a bigger series. The Dodgers are traveling as well, although it's only from Chicago to Minnesota. So not like a huge travel spot there really for them. But we'll see how that pans out. And then I forgot to mention, with Pittsburgh, I think the fact that Pittsburgh is staying at home after those two dramatic wins, I think that's also not a positive, because you stay at home and you're just kind of basking in the glow of those huge wins, and that can kind of like give you a sense of like overconfidence. So I think Pittsburgh is not in a good spot for that reason. Minnesota, I think, might be in a better spot to bounce back, having the day off yesterday and having to think about, we got to refocus here, having lost those two games at home. So I think that may be the spot for Minnesota. And they actually still have not even won a game at home yet, because that was their first home series and they got swept. Although it only wound up being a 2-game series. I think they're not going to want to let that stand. This could be like a chance to press the reset button where you had an unexpected day off and now you're going into a new series here and you have one of the teams that's like one of the most highly touted teams in baseball coming into your house. And it's kind of an unfamiliar environment for the Dodgers, who tend to be of course, they're a warmer weather team and they're not really that familiar with playing in Minnesota, although it's going to be 62 in Minnesota today, so it's not that. So the temperature's not really going to be that much of an effect. Although it looks like it might rain as well, so who knows if this game's even going to get played. But I think we're getting value because of the scheduling spot here, the way the schedule is worked out, and if you're looking at the pitching matchup, I think there's a hidden edge. I have talked about how you can find these hidden edges where you get a pitcher who on the surface looks like they're the better pitcher, but maybe they're not. And I think that might be the case with James Paxton. He is the older of these two pitchers here. He has one start this year and he has a 0 ERA, so that looks good, but a 1.8 whip. He walked 5 guys in 5 innings in that game against San Francisco, and he just got away with it. Like, he did not pitch well in his first start this year, and he got away with putting way too many men on base. He is a good pitcher for sure, but last year with the Red Sox, I mean, he was kind of bouncing around after he had a pretty decent few years with Seattle towards the beginning of his career. They had a couple of shaky years even in there too. Like, his ERA was good, but his whip was bad for a couple of those years. And then he had a couple of good seasons there. Then with the Yankees, it didn't really pan out. He wasn't really that good. So he hasn't really had like very good stats for quite a while now. His last really good season was in 2018. So that's quite a while ago, where he had a 1.1 whip that year and basically a full season with a 3.76 ERA. Since then, he really has not been that good. Last year with my Red Sox, not very good. 4.5 whip 4.5 whip would be atrocious. 4.5 ERA and 1.31 whip. His strikeout numbers remained pretty good, but he was putting too many men on base. He's kind of wild. He's always had a little bit of wildness. He kept it down for a couple of those best years with Seattle, but I think his best years are behind him, man. He's 35 now. He's beyond his prime. I mean, he is a guy that the Dodgers brought in to bolster their rotation. So, I mean, if you have him as like one of the like last relievers in your rotation, yeah, you're in pretty good shape with your rotation, but he's not as good as he once was. So I think the fact that this is the Dodgers and this is Paxton and his name might be kind of just carrying too much weight based on his earlier career performance than what he's done recently, where he hasn't been able to stick with a team. He hasn't pitched very well. Like I said, since 2018, really, he's had it pretty rough. So I don't like Paxton for those reasons. And then putting it even further over the top here, and he is the much older pitcher in this matchup too. Against the Minnesota Twins, there's a lot of at-bats here, big sample size. They are 25 for 80 off of him lifetime, a 312 batting average. And he has 20 strikeouts against them, but 8 walks. So the number of walks is pretty high too. But the Minnesota Twins, even though they're not even known for having very good hitters on this team, they're 312 off of him lifetime. But Carlos Correa has really good numbers off him, 11 for 27. And then also Carlos Santana. I didn't even know he was still around. It's 5 for 6 off of him. But we'll see how that turns out. But Correa has really hit him hard. So Paxton does not have good numbers against these Twins hitters, whereas on the other side, you got Bailey Ober. And he's a guy I've bet on multiple times, and where you have over like the last like couple of years. So he's the younger of these two guys. He's still in his 20s. He's a good young gun who I think kind of just flies under the radar because he's on the Minnesota Twins. People don't pay much attention to him. He's good, but I think you're getting like so much value in this matchup because of how these pitchers looked in their first outing too, where you had Paxton give up no runs. But like I said, he really escaped after giving up a lot of base runners. Bailey Ober had a horrific game where he gave up 8 runs in 1 1/3 innings. Just really, really awful against a pretty bad, I think, Kansas City team. So he's going to be in a huge bounce back. So your recreational bettors are going to see, I get the Dodgers. Like we have the Dodgers here, obviously the better team with James Paxton pitching as a 0 ERA up against Bailey Ober as a 54 ERA. Like, why would we ever want to do that? Well, obviously that first start, you can't gauge anything really from one start. Maybe he was having some opening day jitters or whatever the case may be there. But he is a much better pitcher than that. And against the Dodgers, he has much better numbers than Paxton does against Minnesota. Against the Dodgers, they're only 8 for 35 off them. That's a 229 batting average, 9 strikeouts, no walks. So Ober really he has a much better track record against these Dodgers hitters than Paxton does against the Minnesota hitters. And Ober, his career stats are actually significantly better than Paxton's, even though Ober only has 3 seasons in the majors and kind of had a shortened 2022 season, I think because of injury or whatever. Over that entire span of 3.86 ERA and 1.14 whip, way better than what Paxton has. And he has exactly 1 strikeout per inning, Ober does, which is pretty good, and only 60 walks. So his strikeout walk ratio is almost 5, which is also really good as well. So his stats are all superior to James Paxton. So I think you're actually getting the better starter here, and you're getting the more rested team and the team that has the more rested bullpen here, and the team that's in the better scheduling spot with Minnesota here. So I like all of that. So I'm going to grab Minnesota and might just wait a little bit in this just to see what you can actually get here. You can get them at plus 145 on the money line, I guess. So you can get them plus 1.5 on the run line at minus 120 as well. So, plus 140, I guess, is the best you can do on the money line right now. So we'll see which one that I go with, but I wouldn't mind making either of those plays. Have a good day, man. Let's kick off this week with a winning day here. Those plays, once again, are just 2 baseball plays. Detroit Tigers plus 106 or so, and then Minnesota, we can call it plus 140, I guess, on the money line, but we'll see if I actually play the run line or not. Peace.